everybody. Thank you very much for joining us today for another Helbling English webinar. Just a few rules first of all. Your camera and microphone are inactive during this webinar, but please type any questions you may have into the chat box and the Helbling team are on hand to answer. And you'll all be receiving a follow-up email after the event tomorrow with a link to get your certificate of attendance. So we're absolutely delighted to be joined today by Lindsay Clandfield. Lindsay, as many of you may know, is a very experienced teacher trainer, multiple award-winning writer, and one of the main authors of Helbling's new course for adults, Studio and American Studio. Lindsay's been involved in many creative online projects, from blogging to podcasting, and is particularly interested in the use of technology and multimedia in the classroom. So without further ado, I'll hand over to you, Lindsay. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Hello, this is Lindsay. You can all hear me okay? If you can hear me, give me a little thumbs up or a hello in the chat. And where you are writing from, hello. I see lots of people from Brazil, Mexico, Ecuador. I'm looking over the chat as you're putting this in right now. Okay, people are saying, okay, hello from Italy, Istanbul, Mexico, Moldova. Greetings from Mexico. Excellent. Pachuca Hidalgo, Mexico City, Czech Republic, Morelia. Excellent. Anyway, I'll introduce myself, a little bit about me. My name is Lindsay Clandfield. I'm going to be your host for today's session. I am the author, as Lucy said, of Studio, an American Studio with Helbling. And I'm also an English teacher, a teacher trainer, a writer, and recently, certainly in the past year, a very frequent online teacher, just like many of you have been. And what we're going to be doing today is we're going to be looking at an aspect of language teaching. The aspect of language teaching that we're looking at today is pair work. And pair work is something that's so frequent in language teaching that it's not usually something one would think to question. It's just something that's part of what we do. And it seems almost like normal as part of teaching. However, over the past few years, I've been thinking a lot about pair work. I've also been thinking about it even more since since the pandemic arrived and many of us began teaching online. I've been teaching online myself for many years, but in this past year, I've been able to observe many lessons from around the world in video conference things, in WhatsApp, in Facebook. And how does pair work in those kinds of situations? And is it still as desirable or not? So what we're going to look at is the potential problem areas of pair work and the benefits and disadvantages. But I also want to share with you some tips and tricks that I've experienced myself over years of teaching and using pairs. And finally, some favorite activities to give you that you can do and use with your classes, either your face-to-face socially distanced class or your online class in a room like this. Okay, so let's get started. My first question is, I still do give lots of conferences, but when I gave face-to-face conferences before, when I traveled a lot and gave face-to-face conferences, often I would have a big group of teachers in front of me and I would say, okay, this next activity we're going to do in pairs. I'd like you to talk to your partner and ask this question, something to prepare. And I noticed that more and more, like I would see some teachers just go, other teachers do this. They would start looking at their phone, or they would look at the conference program or something. And I thought, why would it be that we're a group of English teachers? Everyone should love to do pair work. Lots of people did like it, but there were teachers that would do that. And then I spoke to some teachers about it, and they're like, I just don't like doing pair work at a conference, or I didn't want to do the pair work in that activity. So my question is to you, if you want to type in the chat, just your thought, why would teachers in that situation dislike pair work? Or if you know any teachers that don't like doing pair work in class, why do teachers dislike doing pair work with their students? What would be some reasons? Let's get some reasons up in the chat here, and I'll read them out if you can't see them. Try to put the chat to panelists and attendees so everyone can see what you write, but I will read them out. Antonella says it takes time to prepare and monitor. People might not be used to it, says Elizabeth. It's going very quickly. They might lose control, Oscar is saying. They begin to lose control. Introvert, Eduardo says, which I presume means some people are more introverted. They don't want to do pair work. Sometimes it takes students a long time to do an activity. Teachers like pair work, somebody says. Sometimes only one of these things works. Someone says sometimes it takes more time. Sometimes people are shy. They might think it's a waste of time. I think that lots of you are, my partner is unwilling to talk. Someone also mentioned here. Lots of you are saying it is very useful, it's good, but lots of you are able to come up with reasons why teachers might not like pair work. So I want to start by exploring that and using this to think about why do people do it and why do they not do it? Yeah. Sarah Masumi says, each has his or her own method. Yeah. So why might teachers not want to do pair work? And here, if you think about, if you work in a school with other teachers who aren't language teachers, maybe they don't do a lot of pair work at all. Okay. So let's look at this. Some of these things you've already said. Sometimes some teachers think of pair work as time wasting, and some students may think of it as time wasting. So I sometimes wonder when I give a workshop, if I say, now go into pairs and talk in pairs, some teachers are like, yeah, I just wanted to hear what you had to say. I don't want to hear what, this person has to say. Or it's a waste of time. I prefer to do more of the theory or more activities. Yeah. Others may disagree. This is all I'm saying is that some people believe this. Yeah. Okay. Sometimes it may be a situation where pair work is tended to be overused. So if we use pair work a lot, and I've been in some workshops where I thought, the presenter is making us do a lot of pair work, maybe a little bit too much, because I turn to my partner and I'm like, well, we already said this, so I don't know why we're saying it again. Yeah. Sometimes, and I think some of you mentioned this as well, in class, I know that sometimes my learners are resistant to pair work if they're sitting next to someone that they don't like that much. So they might be like, I don't want to share this information with this person next to me, or I don't get along with this person, or they're much older than me, or they're younger than me, or etc. Pair work can sometimes have resistance if it's not clear what to do. So you give some pair work instructions and then half the people are just looking at their phones or doing something else because they don't really understand what to do. They weren't listening. And then finally is that sometimes if there are awkward questions in pair work, there's a risk of loss of face. By loss of face, I mean, like you don't want to be embarrassed. So for example, sometimes pair work things have like ask your partner questions, and it depends what those questions are, because sometimes those questions may be a bit risky. For example, here are some examples from course books in the past that I've heard. Tell a partner about a time you went on a first date. Answer the question, what is a good salary? What's your salary? Or things like that. So things which people might be like, I don't want to share all this information, or even how old are you? So some of these things make people feel awkward. And finally, some teachers think it's hard to control. Okay, so they worry if you have a large class of more than 30 people, maybe you worry that it can get out of control. So with all those negative things, why do pair work? Well, I think a lot of you have been pushing back in the chat saying, I do think it's useful. And I agree. Some people saying, I really like pair work. Here are reasons why we would do it. In terms of methodology, a pair work activity increases student talking time. Yeah. If everyone's talking in pairs, that's more talking than if I speak to one student speaks to me, etc. Yeah. So if the idea of learning a language is to speak more, then pair work will help with that. There's also an idea that two heads are better than one for brainstorming, for trying to do activities, for trying to find the answer to things, that it's helpful to talk to somebody else about it. If we believe that learners should become independent learners, then pair work is a chance to do that. That pair work gives them a chance to be independent so that they're not always depending on me, the teacher, to give them everything in a spoon. Yeah. As well as it being independent, it curiously, pair work can give the teacher a chance to work with individuals. So while people are working in pairs, the teacher can circulate and talk to an individual student, or listen to an individual student, can check in with somebody on something. Yeah. It promotes cooperation, which many of us as teachers would believe is a good thing for students to cooperate with each other. And then there's another argument. This is from like a theoretical argument about learning, is that there are many people who believe that's how people learn. If you believe that learning is social and that you learn from other people, there's a school of belief that says learning is social, and you can even learn from someone who's not necessarily the teacher, someone who's sort of at your level. So people can learn from each other in language classes. Okay. So if you noticed here, in my past slide, I was looking at pair work in normal times. You see how close together they are? Pair work in the pandemic, how is it changing now? Because I think we may be seeing some changes. Sorry, that's my tea. Social distancing is making pair work hard. It's harder to do pair work in a socially distanced classroom. You can't kind of have people all bunched up together. Some people might argue if they're doing class with a mask on, it's harder to, in a foreign language, to understand. So social distancing is making it harder. Not impossible, just harder. The technology makes it possible. As one of my colleagues said, said Zoom and breakout rooms. So Zoom has the possibility of doing breakout rooms. But one interesting thing about technology during the pandemic, for example, Zoom, Teams, Google Meet, is that this technology was not originally made for like teaching languages or teaching in pair work and stuff. It was originally made for meetings and presentations, Zoom especially. And Zoom has been very good. They realized that teachers were using it, and they're trying to make it more so you can do breakout rooms and things. But the technology, what Zoom naturally favors is a presentation type technology, and it's beginning to change. But a lot of these like webinar technology things, and you see this with Teams, they have breakout rooms now too, but Google Meet, etc., is either for sort of like social hanging out or is really good for a presentation, you know, so you can share your slides and things like that. It's less good for the other stuff. So it's not impossible. It's more and more possible each time. It's just not as easy. And the technology in a way kind of pushes you towards as a teacher to do more of this. Like, I have my slides, I can talk, everybody's quiet because I have you all on mute, for example, okay? If you don't have breakout rooms and you're doing video conference teaching, it's very hard to do pair work, if not impossible. You can do what we call open pairs, where I would say, okay, Lucy, ask a question to Lars. Lars, your turn, you answer. That's open pair work that sometimes teachers in large classes do. It's the only way I think you could do it, unless you had breakout rooms in video conferencing. It's also, many teachers say that it's not as easy to monitor in breakout rooms. So even though you can go into a breakout room as a teacher, sometimes you go in and they like stop talking because they see your camera come on and they are like, oh, hi, you're here. So it becomes a bit more difficult. It isn't impossible, but it presents its own challenges. And it's not like in the classroom where you could hear, I could be walking around, I can hear, I'm like, oh, they're having a trouble. Oh, they're having a problem. In the breakout rooms, I have to go to one, then go to another. If someone is having a problem in one, they can ask me, but I can't hear it normally. Okay. So it's not impossible, and it is possible. It's possible to do some control of the breakout rooms, but it's also, it takes getting used to, okay? And breakout rooms in and online pair work stuff takes a bit longer to set up. It's not as quick, even if you're really good at doing it, it's not as quick as sort of saying, just check with a partner while I do the next part of the class, you know, which you can do easily in face-to-face. Okay. Let's look at pair work in English language teaching then, because it's very normal for all of us. But if we take a look at a book from 1967, on the left side of your screen, you see a textbook, kind of famous textbook from 1967. If you look at there, and I went through several old textbooks, there were no instructions for the teachers and no mention of pair work. Here you just see like, make the exercise. It gives you an example. Is this your handbook? Yes, it is. Thank you very much. There's no instruction, like, do they write it? Do they say it? Does the teacher say it? Everyone answer? And there's certainly no pair work instruction. Compare with, on the right side, a course book from 2020 that I wrote for Helbling, where we see, look how many times you see in just a single page there are 4 examples of pair work or group work. And we have it sort of like work in pairs, or ask and answer the questions with a partner, or work in groups. In fact, I did some counting in books of like how many times you would see work in pairs or work in groups in the instructions in a textbook. It becomes sort of like 5 or 6 per 2 pages almost. In fact, it gets so common, we try to say it in different ways, like work in pairs, work with another student, work in groups of 2, A and B, work with a partner, ask and answer with another student. And one of the common errors that I make as a writer is I write it so often that if you see in red, what I do is my most common typo. It's so common as a typo that I have now that my computer thinks that it's a normal writing, so it doesn't autocorrect. Do you see what I say there? I often write by accident work in Paris, which would be very nice to see in a textbook. You see the instruction is now work in Paris. Pair work is used for speaking, but not just for speaking. It's now used for checking answers in language work, for grammar activities. It's used in reading sometimes to do a discussion before a reading or things like that. Sometimes it's used in writing. Sometimes it's used for listening. So it's quite frequent pair work in language classes now. And by and large, I think it's good to have that option and to encourage students to do it. Yeah. Okay. Two other pair work activities that I did some reading on. Yeah, there are 2 famous pair work activities that actually have some research behind them and have been written up. The first is the Jigsaw. Do you all know the Jigsaw activity? A Jigsaw activity is like, I have part of a text, you have part of a text, and we have to kind of work together to answer some questions about the whole text. Yeah. So a Jigsaw activity is like each of us have a different part of something, like a reading. Usually it's just reading where you have different parts of the reading and then you come together to answer some questions. According to what I was reading, the term Jigsaw here, if we look at it in a Google, this Google Ngram, they go through like all the written papers about something, about a certain term. The term Jigsaw classroom, you can see how it becomes more popular from 1970. It goes up and up into the 2000s. Apparently, according to this one article I read, it comes from Austin University, and it was written about as an attempt to create more cooperation, used with younger learners, like with 5th graders. What was really fascinating about the early writing about Jigsaw as a methodology is it was considered an activity integral to desegregation in the United States. So segregation is where children of different races were at different schools, and when they desegregated, they put them. Yes, you can still use it with adults, Lorraine asks. Yeah, definitely now you can. I'm talking about the origins. The origins was with children, to encourage children to work with other children from different backgrounds and different ethnicities. So they were put into the same class. It was the first time. This is in the 1960s or 70s. So these classes become multiracial, and to encourage the children to work together, they created these kinds of activities where students had to piece together something. And so they had to work in pairs or in groups. And in this case, it was more written about, not for language teaching. Originally, it was written about for peer teaching and interdependence. So making people depend on each other. And then very shortly afterwards, it begins to appear in English language teaching methodology books as an activity that originally begins in the language lab. I don't know if you remember the language labs, those things where like there were cassette recorders and stuff like that. And it would sometimes be with like I would hear something, you would hear something different, and we'd have to kind of piece it together. So that's one. Okay. Another classic activity is the information gap. And the information gap is the classic idea of the information gap is like I have a text with some gaps and you have the same text with different gaps and you have to ask me questions and I have to ask you questions. So I might be like, when is Juan's birthday? And you have that information to say Juan's birthday is on January 25th. And then you say it has Maria. And then, but I have that information. So you say, when is Maria's birthday? And I say, her birthday is on, and we complete the things and then we show. This was primarily used as a Pairwork activity in language classrooms. So this was like originated from what I could see in the language classroom. And it was first referred to as a communicative activity and also becomes popular in the early 70s. With one famous book called Pairwork that was only information gaps. But by 1979, it's seen as central to CLT, communicative language teaching. It's seen as one of the main methodological activities. You know, so if you were showing a communicative language classroom, you would show an example of a information gap. There's that term information gap as it develops from the 1950s, not at all. No one talks about it. We start seeing it more in the 1960s up until the 2000s, where it's much more common. Here's an example from that 1978 book. This is the 1984 version, so it was redone, called Pairwork. This is an example of an information gap. So you can see here, this is students A page, and they have the instructions. And then it says at the bottom, student B has information about these 6 people. Work together to see if you can work out the names and ages and write them in the boxes. Okay. And always remember, the information gap was always, you must not let student B see your page. So you can't show the page. Yeah. Someone is saying, Andrea is saying this works great. Yeah. Julio saying some books still use this activity. Yes, they still do. It's still a common one. And we'll see how it's modernized. Here's another example. I love this because it shows the old technology from the 1980s of a stereo player. So you have that information about this, about selling one, and student B is going to phone and ask about the cassette recorder, and they're going to ask you questions. He has information and you have different information. And so you do the phone call like that. So that's a Pairwork, classic Pairwork activity. And Yeshim asks, how can you adapt this to online teaching? Good question. We'll see that in a moment when we see other ways that you can do Pairwork. Okay. Pairwork is also, just to finish our theoretical part, Pairwork is also seen as integral now in terms of modern language teaching. In the most recent version of the Common European Framework, they talk about the skills, 2 other skills now. So the Common European Framework is talking about the 4 skills, but also 2 other skills. One is interaction, and there's a definition on the screen there. And 2 is mediation. Mediation is takes a little longer. We won't do a whole session on this, although you could. Mediation is where you're helping somebody else understand something. So you have maybe like I have a bit more knowledge about the language or the culture behind it, so I'm helping you understand the text or the situation by explaining it. So I'm mediating it for you. But so both of those are now considered, as some of you mentioned, as these are important parts of learning and how we learn languages. And so you can expect to see it much more now. So what are some strategies in using Pairwork? What I'd like to share with you now is things that I've learned as a teacher myself and from many other teachers in using Pairwork, and how we can, little tricks, as it were, to make Pairwork work better. So strategies and hacks, I've called this. The first thing that I like to do with a new class is get off to a good start, because some classes are more resistant to Pairwork than others. So I usually will do things like move students around on the first day and then on other days. If I have an online class on video, I will use a breakout room in the first day. So they just know that that's going to be what's going to happen. Okay. So moving around students, and if it's a face-to-face class, get them used to the idea of changing pairs. I use Pairwork from the beginning of a course so that people know that the classroom will be, this will be what's happening. This one is interesting. I use what I would call low risk and convergent Pairwork activities at the beginning. When I say low risk, I mean an activity where the students can easily do this together in pairs and it's not some kind of risky thing. So for example, if they had to do an exercise where they had to find the answers together, that's convergent. They both converge on the same answers. Where I find it problematic, if it's riskier, because maybe for example, let me give you an example. A divergent activity is one where it can go in any direction, any kind of question. And I was at a workshop where the workshop leader made us go into pairs, and then we had to share with our partner an example of a bad class that we had. That's a high risk divergent activity. It's divergent because we can talk about anything. It can go in any direction. It's high risk because if I don't know my partner, maybe I don't want to talk about a real life bad classroom. I don't have confidence in them. I don't know them well enough. So it's a bit risky compared to an activity where, okay, match the pictures to the words with your partner and then test each other. You know, that's low risk and we all agree on the thing. I think that the other question is good maybe later on when you know each other, but just not at the beginning. And in the same way, I try not to do personalized or potential face loss activities with new groups. I'll be talking about online activities in a moment, Jacqueline, when I get to the activities. I'm just talking about tips now in general, okay? In terms of lesson planning, there have often been two. I don't know if anyone has seen this. Has anyone seen this this expression before? Think, pair, share. Have you seen think, pair, share? Nope, yes, never, yes, yes. Okay, this was very common in American universities, yeah? So, and not in language classes, another one. So the lecturer might say something and they say, read this quote, or I'm gonna read you a quote, think about it for a few minutes, now pair, discuss it, and then share your thoughts and then share with the group. I used to think, pair, share in online classes with breakout rooms where they would read something on the PowerPoint together. I'd say, now I'm going to turn my video off, think about it. Then I put you into into breakout rooms. That's your pair. And when you come back, you have to share. So we would do the think, pair, share, like based on an image or a text or something like that. Another one that I wrote an article about that I called Heads Up, Heads Down, and Heads Together. And this was lesson planning where you would want to have a balance. So certain parts of a lesson may be heads up. By that, I mean the part where everybody is watching the screen or watching you as the teacher, yeah? Like you're lecturing or you're teaching, yeah? That's a heads up thing. Or you're showing a video. Heads down is when students are doing like a grammar exercise, or they're doing a reading, or they're writing something individually. And heads together is when they talk together, yeah, when they are doing a communicative activity. And one of my points is when I was talking about that is planning a lesson to that is, again, what I said before about technology shaping, leading towards some kind of teaching. A lot of the technology we have is very good for heads up. It's hard to do heads down because when you see yourself on the screen, you always just want to keep talking. So the heads down is a part where you would say, all right, everybody, I want you to think about this now. I'm going to turn my video off. And then you let them do their heads down work with your video off or something like that. In the classroom, it's a sentence where we say, okay, take 5 minutes to do this exercise, and then you kind of circulate around or you prepare the next part of the lesson. And heads together is online, is breakout rooms. And in face-to-face class is like your pair work or group work. So I think that a good lesson has a balance of heads up, heads down, and heads together. How do we put students into pairs? If we're not, now I'm not talking about online here. Now I'm talking about not online. we can also, very often we do it non-randomly. So non-randomly is like, okay, just work with the person next to you. Yeah. Um, or the teacher might say, okay, Julio, you're going to work with Andrea. Lucy, you're going to work with Lucia. Lars, you're going to work with Greta. Yeah. And so, and maybe the teacher is thinking, I'm putting a stronger person with a weaker person. Or you could put learners who have a similar age, or you could put learners with a similar language background if you have a multi-language classroom. Some teachers, if you're teaching younger learners, sometimes put pairs like a less disruptive younger learner with a more disruptive one. So you don't put two really loud and disruptive people together because they cause a big mess. So you kind of mix it up. This is non-randomly. Here are ways of doing it randomly. And some of you have said this as well. Randomly, for example, numbering off like, okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. The ones work together, the twos work together, the three, yeah, that's numbering. By order, like Heike and others people said, birthday. Get in order of birthday. And now the person next to you is your partner. Get in order of height. The person next to you is your partner. Get an alphabetical order of your first name or your last name. Yeah. One that I've used, I don't know if have any of you used a deck of cards. I used to use, when I was teaching face-to-face, I used a deck of cards where I would, as people came in, I was choosing cards. And so then I would have like, if I had 18 students, I'd have 18 cards, but I distribute cards. I say all the twos get together, all the kings get together. And then if they regroup, I could say now all the hearts get together, all the diamonds come together. Putting names together was another thing that I did with bits of paper, where I would have different bits of paper with one part had one part of the name and the other had another. So I would have like Bugs, Bunny, Mickey, Mouse, I don't know, whatever, Batman, Robin. And then what they would do is each person would come and get a paper, and then they would have to find their partner, the other part of their paper that goes together. Other things that I think some of you suggested, hobbies, things like that. So what I call finding things in common. So finding something in common, like find someone who has the same shoe size as you. Find someone who likes the same fruits as you do. Find someone who likes the same kind of ice cream that you like, you know, and the first person you find, that's your partner. And then another one that I thought that I did once in a workshop that I was a participant, but the teacher in the workshop was giving the thing and they said, now you're going to work with somebody else. Look under your chair. There's a Post-it note. And so we all looked under the chair, and sure enough, there was a Post-it note, and each of them had a little like letter, and you had to find the other person with the same letter. And it was, I have to tell you, it was like almost magical, because that's sort of like, oh, wow, there is a little, it's like finding a treasure and then finding someone else who had the same treasure. So that was fun as well. So that's a more random way. Okay. All right. Here's one trick that I've also learned on how to reorganize students into pairs quickly. Again, not online. This is in the face-to-face classroom. So I don't know if you've done this as well, like you have them working in pairs and then you want them work in a new pair. So you say, now find a different partner. But if you don't plan it, some of them kind of move around, and there's always like one or two people who are together with the same partner that they were in the first time. Another teacher taught me this trick. They said, look, when you have everybody in pairs, stop, and you want them to do new pairs, stop the activity and then ask one person to stand up and go to the other side of the room and sit with the person on the other side of the room, and then start and say, now you have the new person you're next to is your new pair. So like you get up, walk over to that side of the room and sit with that person. Now you two, you two, you two, you two, and everyone is just working with the person next over. So instead of everybody moving around, only one person moves around. And that was interesting. Another one that I used to do is the circles. Back when we could do face-to-face classes in the good old days, have an inside circle of chairs and an outside circle of chairs. Yeah, Greta, I agree. This is fun. So the inside circle of chairs, everyone's sitting in the circle there, and the outside circle, so like you are sitting in front of someone in the circle. Yeah. So like I'm sitting, like one person is sitting here and the other person is sitting there in front of them. But only the outer circle moves. So they ask some questions, and then I would blow a whistle, or I'd say now change, and then everybody in the outside circle moves, but the inside circle stays sitting. Okay, so that's another one. And finally, what would be complete in a talk about pair work than a situation where you have an odd number of students? So I want to just go over this again. Some of you are probably thinking, yeah, but what happens when you have 13 students, Lindsay? What happens when you have 27? Right? And so obviously you either work with one of the students yourself or you make a group of 3. Yeah, that's what you usually do, right? Tip: if you do have an odd number, usually what we do is we start with the pairs. So I say you two together, you two, you two, you two, and then I get to the end and there's like an extra person, right? And so I always have to say, oh, Maria, can you work with Julio and Anita? What does that do? That means that Maria sort of feels like, oh, again, I'm the extra person. Like I'm, it's always me, I'm the extra person. So to fix this problem, what you do, and it makes you seem like super organized, is you begin with the group of 3 or with you pairing off. So instead of saying at the end, Maria, I would say, Maria, you're going to work with Juan and Jose. Okay? Now, so the 3 of you, good. Now, you two, you two, you two, you two, you two, you two. The difference is now Maria and Juan and Jose feel like, oh, Lindsay planned it, that we would work as a 3 together. It wasn't sort of like, this activity isn't working because there's a group of, you know what I mean? Like it makes it seem like this is part of the plan. Don't worry, we're all good. Yeah? See what? The slides will be shared, Juan, at the end. So I think, Lucy, will you put a comment about that in the chat? All right. And finally, about speaking, and this is even more interesting now in social distance classes, if you have more space between you. Sometimes your classes look like that picture there, where everybody is in rows and maybe they're in pairs, and you ask them to do pair work, but they're still facing in front, right? They're still kind of looking in front, and so they might be sitting like this. They might be like looking, I'm looking. It's like you wouldn't have a nice dinner sitting next to each other like that at a chair, yeah? So if I want them to have a conversation about something, I want them to look at each other. So what I called it with a group of students that I said, we're calling this speaking stations. And speaking stations was when I said everyone in speaking stations, it meant they had to turn their chair and talk to the other person face to face like this. So that meant that they were not like looking at me and sort of just talking secretly to each, or like side to side. Yes. So that's also why I think that sometimes my pair work in breakout rooms online has been better, because they're actually like looking at each other on the screen, whereas in classroom, they're sometimes looking in front of each other. So I get them to do speaking stations. And it also means that they are kind of feeling like, now I'm in speaking mode. And it's even better if you get them to stand up. So it's like, okay, everybody turn, face each other, stand up, and now do your speaking activity. And then when you sit down, you finish. All right. For monitoring and correcting, this is another part of pair work, is I often set time limits for pair work activities. Demonstrating is usually better than explaining, so I demonstrate. Making notes, and if possible, I ask students to repeat a pair work activity with a new partner, and then I give them feedback. So now, how does this work in the online class? The answer, as many of you have said, is breakout rooms. So I am assuming in this point that some of you, if you do have Zoom or whatever, you would have used a breakout room. If you use breakout rooms, I think the instructions here become even more clear, and I try to break them down into stages. So I would say, okay, in this next activity, you're going to do activity 3 in your textbook. You need to ask all the questions, 1, write answers, 2, and then nominate someone to report back when you finish the breakout room activity. And then I would say, Lucy, what are the 3 things that I said? 1, write the questions. 2, ask the questions, ask the questions, write the answers, report back. I also like to have an outcome for the task. So I don't just say in the breakout room, okay, can you just talk about this in pairs? I would say, talk about it in pairs, make 3 sentences. Or talk about it in pairs, write 5 ideas. Or Talk about this in pairs. Ask at least 3 questions each and 3 answers. Then when I go into the breakout room, I can say, okay, so Erica and Gio, how many questions have you done? 2? Okay, so 1 more question. I'll be back a bit later. Yeah. Because breakout rooms take a little bit longer, this is up to you. Everybody does what they want to do, but I do fewer breakout rooms, but I give more time for the breakout rooms. So I don't do it as much in online as I do in face-to-face. And I've been experimenting recently in asking students to do some pair work activities for asynchronous tasks, like via WhatsApp or via Facebook. So I asked them to find a study buddy, and then their study buddy, I would assign an activity for doing like during the week. During the week, you need to interview your partner about sports in your study buddy WhatsApp channel or Telegram or whatever forum that you're using. Yeah, so I'm doing that as well now. I'd like to move on now to give you some practical activities of pair work that I like to do. The first is, if we take a look here, if you look at the image in the middle there, you see questions 1 to 10. Yeah. This is a normal thing, right? Just like questionnaires, that's a normal pair work thing. They have to ask and answer questions. One tip that I like to do is I get them to make their questions, but then they number the questions. So if I was working with you, Andrea, I just saw type something. I would say, Andrea, you write 10 questions for me about hobbies. I'm going to write 10 questions for you about hobbies or whatever. Yeah. And then when we have our questions, like I would say, Andrea, I'm going to say a number. I'll say the number 5. Find your number 5 and ask me that question. And then you would do that. And then you would say, okay, Lindsay, question 3. And I would find my question 3 and I would ask that. So in a way, it's a really small thing, but it kind of gives a bit of like control. It makes you feel like you have a little bit of control over and there's a kind of a bit of mystery as well. It just also focuses it a bit more. So they write the questions, they number them. Student A calls out a number at random. Student B asks that question, then they swap roles and repeat. Another one here is, if you look, you can see the sentences here. Just take a look at the sentences for a moment. It says, if I could travel anywhere in the world, etc. Yeah. But so normally in this activity, you complete this for yourself. Yeah. So a normal way of doing this activity is like complete the sentences and then read them to a partner. Another fun way of doing it, and I've used it a lot in my books, is you write your partner's name and you complete the sentences for your partner, but without talking to the partner. So let's say Alexandra Gonzalez, who just said nicely, useful information. Let's imagine that I am partners with Alexandra Gonzalez. So I would write Alexandra's name, and then I would be thinking, okay, if I could travel anywhere in the world, and I would write, I would go to France. And then if I could speak another language, I would choose to speak Chinese. If I won $1 million, I would, and then I would write all of those thinking of that I am Alexandra. And then at the end of the activity, now I read the sentences and Alexandra tells me if that's true. Let's see, Alexandra Gonzalez. I was going to say, if I could travel anywhere in the world, I would go to France. Is that true for you? Would that be true for you, Alexandra? Let's see if I guessed right for someone. False. Okay. Where would you go, Alexandra, if you could go anywhere in the world? You're going to say, I would just go somewhere else, anywhere, leave my house. You would go see a relative, I bet now. Alexandra, where would you go? Oh, Germany. Okay. Excellent. All right. So anyway, you get the idea. That's how that activity would work. So I complete for that person, they complete for me, and then we kind of have a natural information gap. Information gaps were the ones we talked about before. I find doing these, that students can make their own really easily with dictation information gaps. So they read numbers to each other, listen and write. So this kind of stuff for dictation, mutual dictation things are very easy as simple information gaps. These are very easy type things to do with low levels. Here's another one that I've done as well in breakout rooms. is I show everybody a picture like this all together. Everyone is all together looking at this. Yeah. And I say, you're not allowed to write anything. You have 15 seconds. Just look, look, look. And then I put people into breakout rooms and they try to remember how many things they saw. Yeah. So like a question mark, a red apple and lots of green apples, but they do that in the breakout rooms. And then I share a link where they can look at that picture again. Yeah. So even something like that. Or here's another one that I did. Well, my colleague did, is we mailed these as PDFs. So send a PDF with these images. And I told the students were supposed to print, if they can, the PDF and cut out the cards. And then they were supposed to work in the breakout room in pairs and turn over a card, show the card to the partner, and the partner would ask a question about their experience using have you ever, okay? Can you guess what kind of questions these pictures would give? Does anyone want to look at the pictures and write what a question would be from these experiences pictures? Yeah, but no, what was the question? What's the question? Like Laura Gonzalez said, have you ever seen a ghost? Have you ever made bread is G. Have you ever done a Sudoku? Have you ever eaten sushi? Have you ever visited Italy or Greece? I think it's Greece, actually. Have you ever seen a star or been on a Walk of Fame or anything? Have you ever read War and Peace? Okay. But what's interesting there is the kind of, if I was doing it face-to-face, I would make these as little cards. They put them face down and then one person picks it up, shows it to the other person, but they can even do that in the online classroom. There's something fun as well, I find, in breakout rooms or in teaching when students show a piece of paper. Oh, well, we have got my thing. If you show a piece of paper to each other with something written, that's can kind of be a fun thing to do as well. Okay. Retelling stories is another one. So in this one person has pictures 1, 3, 5, and 7. And so if I have 1, 3, 5, and 7, my partner has 2, 4, 6, and 8. And so I begin telling a story by looking at picture 1 and start the story. And then they tell the next part of the story from their picture 2. Then I tell another part of the story from 3. And we go on like that throughout the whole thing. And then the idea is at the end, we have to report back to a group our whole story. Okay, what happened in the story and how were each story different. Pairwork doesn't have to be always for just like free speaking and things like that. Here was an activity where Pairwork works really fun for reading together in pairs. So in studio, we have lots of little tiny fiction stories, like original extracts from short stories. So this is like a little extract from a mystery story, I think. But here, the way it's written is that it becomes more interesting to read aloud together. So we tell students, you alternate, you have to read with a partner where one person reads one line, the next person reads the next. And we say you can read some sentences loudly and some quietly, and then 2 people present. Okay. Another thing is doing role plays. Of course, role plays is another great Pairwork activity where, you know, they pretend they're in a shop. Let's take a look at a video here, which could lead into a role play. All right, just take a look at the video and here we go.
Excuse me, how much is this blue jacket?
Let me see. It's $150.
Wow, that's expensive. Can I try it on?
Of course. What size are you?
Small, I think.
Okay. The mirror's over there.
Thanks.
All right, so here we had the practice comes afterwards. Yeah. So for example, they see a video and then they have to practice. This is the typical thing, right? Everyone has seen things like this. You are the student A, you are the customer, student B, you are the sales assistant. But if you notice in the video that we did here, the actors are working with a background. You see, they're not really in a shop. It's a background that we made of an image. What we included in studio was the background for you then to use in an online classroom or displaying in your face-to-face classroom. So in the studio course, all of the role plays or a large amount of the role plays that we do in a section called 101 Things to Do in English have these backgrounds. So you see the actors do it, and then the students can do the same thing. So we have shops, train stations, airports, school classrooms, parks, streets. So you can do your asking for directions in a street of New York or something and put them like with the background of the street. So in your classroom, it then becomes a bit like this, yeah? So, and in the online classroom, you just display it and have two people do the everyone turns their camera off except the pair who present their role play with that as the background. And we call these videoscapes. This brings me, as we're coming to an end, to Pairwork and Studio as a whole. So Studio is the new course, Studio and American Studio. There's an American version that I wrote with Helbling. I'm very proud of it, very happy to have written it. And because it had a lot of pair work, I just wanted to show you how this is happening in a modern course, for example. We do a lot of the balance of the pair work. There's pair work in lessons and reviews. What we don't have is we don't have back of the book pair work. You know how in many books there's like, turn to page 300, turn to page 130, student A. Student B, turn to page 132. We didn't do that. We did it in some review units, but what we did, apart from the videoscapes, which you saw, is we put all of the pair work, A and B things in the course book into an app. So there's a Helbling app, free app that goes with the course, which has, hold on, I'll fast forward here, yes, which has the A and B pair work activities. So instead of like students getting lost in the book, you just open your app and it says tap on unit 4. Okay, unit 4. Now there should be pair work. You're A, you're B. You tap on A, you see A. You tap on B, you see B. That also means they can't really see the other person's screen, right? Like you would be showing like these two people are doing it here or online. And because we know you might not have a situation where they all could use their phones in class, all of the pair work activities in this way are also, all of the communicative activities are also printable PDFs. So there are color PDFs where it's nice and big. So you can print it out and cut it in half and they can have a nice big thing instead of like looking at page 130 where there are 5 or 6 of those on the page and they're trying to find the right one. It becomes a lot easier to use. Now, I did want to summarize here, and then I want to give you a present. So we've got another 5 minutes, but I have a gift for you all. And I'm just going to, if you let me summarize, then I'll give you a little present. I wanted to talk about why we used pair work and why we didn't, why people might not like to and why they might like to. We looked a little bit about about the development and history of pair work in English language teaching, how pair work could fit into lesson planning, pair work, what I call hacks or strategies, tips, like with odd number of students, putting students into pairs. Some of my favorite pair work activities, how I put this into a book that I wrote. And finally, I told you that there were sample PDFs. I asked Helbling if we could give these to you for free, and they were really nice. And they said, yes, okay, we'll put these together in a special pack that people can download who came to this webinar only. So, or, well, I think that's the case. It may be available later on, but at the moment it will be given just to you, and Lucy will be telling you exactly how to find it. But here it's a PDF where you have all of these color pages where it's in color, whole page activities with student A, student B, a bit like that 1978 book Pair Work, but more modernized with more with different levels, and they're all from the book, but they're little samples for you. And that's at our website, which I'm going to stop here and get Lucy to tell you more about that. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Time flies when you're having fun. It's almost been an hour. I'll let Lucy take over the last part. And meanwhile, I will say thank you, and especially to my friends in Latin, who speak Spanish. Hasta luego. I hope to see all of you either in Latin America or in Turkey or in any of those other countries when we can all travel again and I can leave my apartment just like all the rest of you and we can meet and talk in person.